There is something curious about the law of attraction that almost no one explains clearly. Many people spend years trying to manifest new things. They think positively, visualize, repeat affirmations, watch videos, read books, and even so, they feel that reality continues almost the same. Not because they are doing everything wrong, but because there is a silent detail in how manifestation works that completely changes the game. A detail that seems contradictory. The more you try to force it, the less reality moves. The more you pressure the result, the more distant it seems to become. And the most curious thing is that when you understand this mechanism, you start to notice that many of the things that happened naturally in your life followed exactly this logic. Some opportunities appeared when you were more relaxed. Some solutions showed up when you stopped insisting. Some paths opened when you simply changed your internal state. This happens because manifestation does not respond only to what you want. It responds to the state from which you desire. And when you begin to understand the silent paradoxes behind this process, something changes deeply. You stop fighting reality and begin to notice how it actually responds. In the next few minutes, you will understand some of these paradoxes of consciousness, and it is very possible that after realizing this, you will never see manifestation the same way again. Because sometimes the secret is not to do more. It is to stop doing it the wrong way. There is a silent moment when many people start noticing something strange in the manifestation process. They really want something to happen. They think about it all day. They try to keep the mind positive. They mentally repeat the result they want. They make an effort to believe, but the more they push, the more reality seems to remain still. This happens because there is a detail that is almost never explained. Manifestation does not respond only to what you want. It responds to the emotional state from which that desire is born. When desire comes with tension, urgency, or need, it carries a very specific message, even if you do not realize it. It is as if your internal state were constantly saying, "This is still not here. I need this to happen. I am not complete without this." And this feeling of lack becomes the dominant signal. Now notice something curious in your own life. Some of the best things that have ever happened to you probably appeared during moments when you were not pushing so hard. An opportunity appeared when you were calmer. A solution emerged when you decided to stop insisting. An unexpected conversation opened a door that you were not even trying to force at that moment. This happens because when the mind relaxes, the internal field changes, the tension decreases, the resistance decreases. And when resistance decreases, reality finds more space to reorganize. Those who begin to understand their own consciousness realize something simple but extremely powerful. Desire is important, but desiring without desperation is what truly opens the path. Because desire stops being an urgent request. It stops being a constant attempt to convince life and becomes simply a clear direction within you. And when the direction is clear, life begins to find much more natural ways to respond. But here there is an even deeper detail that almost no one notices at first. Even when someone understands this, they often remain trapped in another silent habit. The habit of trying to control everything. Control when it will happen. Control how it will happen. Control every step of the process. And this is exactly the point that creates another important paradox of consciousness. Because in the next moment you will notice something that seems contradictory at first glance. The more someone tries to control every detail of reality, the less real control that person has over the final result. Now it is worth looking at something that many people only realize after some time observing their own life. From an early age, almost everyone learns the same logic. If you want something, you have to chase it. You have to insist. You have to fight. But when you start looking more carefully at the moments that truly changed your life, you notice something curious. Many of those things did not appear when you were forcing them. They appeared when you were in a different state, more present, more open, more confident. Maybe an unexpected conversation that turned into an opportunity. Maybe an idea that appeared when you were not even trying to solve anything. This happens because there is a huge difference between acting from lack and acting from alignment. When someone acts from lack, every step carries urgency. But when someone acts from alignment, they continue moving, just without the feeling of emptiness. And at that moment, something interesting happens. Opportunities start to seem less rare. Ideas arise with more clarity. The right people appear more naturally. Not because the universe suddenly decided to help, but because the version of you that is moving has changed. And I want to ask you a quick question. Do you feel that today you are living more in chase mode or alignment mode? Right here in the comments, align if you want to start operating more from that state. And if this type of reflection is opening your mind at this level, subscribe to the channel. Because when you understand how your consciousness really works, life begins to respond in a completely different way. And this is exactly how the search begins, silently, to transform into attraction. Now it is worth talking about another silent paradox that usually appears right after a person understands that they do not need to pressure results so much. Even after realizing that desperation disrupts the flow, many people remain trapped in another very common habit, the attempt to control everything, control when something will happen, control how it will happen, control every detail of the path. And at first this seems logical, but after all, we were taught that having control means security. But when it comes to manifestation, something curious happens. The more someone tries to control every detail of reality, the more internal tension appears. The mind begins to monitor everything all the time. Is it already happening? Am I doing it right? What if it doesn't work? This constant vigilance creates a feeling of tightness inside, and that tightness is exactly the opposite of the state that allows things to flow. When someone begins to understand this, they notice an important shift. Real control is not about controlling the world. It is about controlling your own state. You cannot control when a specific opportunity will appear, but you can control whether your mind will enter anxiety or remain stable. You cannot control exactly how a solution will arise, but you can control whether you react with tension or with clarity. And when a person takes on this kind of internal control, something changes. The mind stops wasting energy trying to predict everything and begins to use that energy to better perceive what is happening around. And this is where we enter a very practical part of this process. Now comes the part of applying what we are talking about in a simple way in everyday life. Because manifestation does not happen only during moments of meditation or visualization. It mainly happens in the small, common situations of life. For example, imagine that you are waiting for an important response from work. Most people enter an automatic cycle. They open their phone several times. They check email constantly. They start imagining negative scenarios. This creates tension. Now notice what happens when you change just one thing. Instead of monitoring the result, you decide to focus on your state. Take a deep breath. Return to what you were doing. Keep your mind stable. You are still interested in the result, but you are not emotionally attached to it. Another very common example happens with money. Many people look at their bank account already expecting to feel worried. The body tenses. The mind begins calculating problems. But someone who begins applying awareness does something different. They look at the situation calmly. Instead of thinking this is bad, they ask, what can I organize better here? This small shift in posture completely changes the internal state. And the internal state changes decisions. And different decisions create different paths. One more simple example. Imagine a difficult conversation with someone. The automatic reaction would be entering the conversation already defensive. But when someone masters their own state, they do something different. They breathe before responding. They listen more. They speak with more clarity. And this completely changes the direction of the interaction. These examples seem small, but it is exactly in these simple moments that the internal identity begins to change. And when identity changes, the way reality responds also begins to change. Not because you forced manifestation, but because you started operating from a different state. Now there is another point that almost always appears after a person begins adjusting their internal state, and it is much more common than it seems. Many people believe they need to feel good only when something good happens. First the money arrives, Then calm comes. First the opportunity appears. Then confidence comes. First the relationship happens, then the feeling of love comes. But vibrational logic works in a completely inverted way. And this is exactly where another important paradox appears. Most people wait to receive something in order to feel complete. But those who begin to master their own consciousness take the opposite path. First they change their internal state. Then reality begins to follow. Think about something simple from everyday life. Imagine two people facing exactly the same situation at work. Both have similar challenges. Both are trying to grow professionally. But the way each one perceives themselves changes everything. One of them constantly carries a feeling of insufficiency. They think things like, I am still not good enough. Other people are more prepared than I am. Maybe this is not for me. Even if this person has talent, they tend to act with more hesitation. They avoid opportunities. They speak less in meetings. They take longer to make decisions. Now observe the second person. They also have doubts. They are also learning. But internally they carry a different feeling. A feeling that they can grow, that they can learn along the way, that they deserve to occupy bigger spaces. This internal difference changes everything. Posture changes. The way of speaking changes. Choices change. And over time, opportunities begin to respond differently. Not because the universe chose to favor someone, but because the internal state changed the way of acting. And the way of acting changed the type of response that reality offers. The same happens in other areas of life. A person who constantly feels needy tends to enter relationships trying to fill a void. This creates attachment. It creates fear of losing. It creates emotional dependence. Now observe someone who has already developed a sense of completeness. This person enters relationships differently. They are not trying to be saved. They are simply sharing their life. And this completely changes the type of relationship that appears. That is why the inversion of lack is so powerful. When someone begins to internally develop a sense of sufficiency, something silently changes. The person starts acting like someone who already has value. And when that state becomes natural, the external world begins to reflect exactly that frequency. Because reality does not respond only to what you ask for. It mainly responds to what you have become capable of sustaining within yourself. Now it is worth looking at another paradox that usually appears when someone begins to better understand their own internal state. Many people live trying to prove that they deserve something, prove that they deserve to earn more, prove that they deserve recognition, prove that they deserve a better opportunity, so they work more than they can sustain, pressure themselves all the time, and live in a kind of silent race to demonstrate value. The curious thing is that this posture often creates exactly the opposite effect. Because when someone lives trying to prove they are enough, deep down they are reinforcing the feeling that they still are not. The mind enters a constant state of comparison. It always seems like something is missing. It always seems like it is still not enough. Now notice what happens when someone changes this internal point. Instead of trying to prove value, they begin to assume value. This does not mean arrogance. It simply means recognizing your own place. Posture changes. The person speaks with more clarity. They make decisions with more confidence. They stop accepting situations they once accepted out of fear of losing space. And something interesting begins to happen. People start responding differently. Recognition appears more naturally. Opportunities begin to arise without so much effort to convince, because the world tends to reflect the way you position yourself within it. When someone tries to prove value all the time, they transmit doubt. When someone internally assumes value, they transmit presence. And presence completely changes how reality responds. Now it is worth talking about another paradox that many people only discover after some time observing their own life. The belief that everything needs to be extremely difficult. Many people grew up hearing that important things only happen through a lot of suffering, a lot of struggle, a lot of exhaustion. So they end up creating a silent association between value and difficulty. If something comes easily, it seems strange. If something flows naturally, it even seems suspicious. But when mind, emotion, and intention begin to enter alignment, something different happens. Effort does not disappear, but it changes quality. Instead of feeling like a constant fight against everything, it begins to feel like movement in the right direction. You still work, you still learn, you still face challenges, but there is clarity. And when there is clarity, actions stop feeling like an enormous weight. A simple example of this happens at work. When someone is completely misaligned with what they do, every task feels heavy. Small decisions exhaust them. Motivation disappears quickly. Now think about someone who has found a direction that makes sense. The work still requires energy, but the person does not feel like they are fighting against themselves. There is movement, there is purpose. The same is true for projects, studies, and even life changes. When the internal state is aligned, effort stops being just exhaustion. It transforms into progress. And this leads to the final paradox of all. Because when someone begins to master their own consciousness, a profound change happens. The person stops trying to convince life all the time, stops asking for signs at every step, stops seeking external confirmation for every decision. Instead, they begin to internally sustain the state of what they want to live. And when that state becomes stable, reality no longer needs to be pressured. It simply begins to respond.